Years ago, the original Fuji X100 was announced. Today, we get to see its successor, the Fuji X100v. Fujifilm was kind enough to fly me out to New York last week to take a look at the new X100v. The original Fuji X100 was a camera that meant a lot to me. I got it when I had a 5D Mark II, the first full-frame camera that I had ever owned, and as soon as I got that X100, I stopped using my 5D. The quality out of that camera was incredible, especially considering how unbelievably small and compact that camera was. So when I was given the opportunity to fly out to New York this past week to play with and get my hands on the new X100v, I was extremely excited. The X100v is the fifth in the line of X100 revisions. It's definitely the most refined of the lot. One of the new features of this camera is a newly designed 23mm f2 lens. The previous lens, as far as I know, had been the same ever since the original X100, but they finally decided to update the lens for this new X100v. From what I can tell and the brief time that I had with the camera, it looks like they've increased the sharpness a little bit when you're close focusing. On the previous versions of the X100, when you focus to like the minimum focus distance on the lens, it gets pretty soft. This lens on the new X100v doesn't get as soft as the previous ones, but the out of focus areas still exhibit a little bit of sort of like a smeared quality that's a little bit different than, you know, your typical out of focus area, and that only happens when you're close focusing, basically at the minimum focus distance. Other than that, it looks to me like the bokeh has been improved, at least in my opinion. On the previous cameras, the bokeh was a little too soft for me, and I like a little bit more defined out of focus specular areas. So this lens definitely has more of a vintage lens feel, in my opinion, than the previous ones, which were sort of like a modern, a little bit too soft out of focus area lens. The X100v shares the same processor and sensor as the new X Pro 3, as well as an upgraded EVF from the previous models. Autofocus has been improved from the previous models as well. Face tracking was also working quite well while I was walking around doing some street photography during the hands-on. The camera does use the same battery as the previous versions, as well as the X-T3 and the X Pro 3. The X100v is weather sealed, except for the front opening of the lens. So to completely weather seal the X100v, you do need to use a screw-on filter on top of the accessory ring that attaches to the front of the camera. Another addition to this camera is an increase in the built-in neutral density filter. The new version is a 4-stop ND filter. The new ISO selection dial, it locks up, and then you can twist it freely without any sort of resistance or it wanting to pull itself back down, which just makes using that ISO dial a lot more easy. And honestly, I hope they add that to all of the other cameras that have the combination ISO and shutter speed dial because it just worked a lot better than the previous system. I think this camera is beautiful, and this new version is the culmination of 10 years of this X100 design philosophy. The X100v is actually milled out of aluminum instead of cast and formed over metal forms like the previous one was, so you end up getting really sharp angles, lines on this camera that look really nice and really refined. When I had initially heard that they were going to be adding a tilt screen to the X100, I was a little concerned that the design might make the camera a little bit more bulky due to the fact that it needed to add a hinge and a sturdy enough screen. Somehow on this X100V, they made the new two-way tilt screen absolutely beautiful on this camera, honestly. It's completely flush with the back of the body of the camera, and it doesn't add any thickness to the camera at all. A controversial thing that Fuji has been doing recently with their cameras has been removing the directional pads on the back of the camera. This camera does not have a D-pad and instead just has a joystick for menu selection as well as other functions on the camera. I think the joystick is superior for navigating the menus than the D-pad. I have one major complaint with the joystick, and this had also bugged me when using the X Pro 3, but when the camera is dangling from a strap, that joystick has the tendency to rub on your shirt or your coat, and it will inevitably move the focus point. I kept wondering why whenever I brought my camera up to my face that the focus point would be off to the left or off to the right when I never set it like that. And then I finally realized that it was my coat and the camera swinging on my chest or on my side that was causing the joystick to move that focusing point. If there was a way to disable the focusing point selection with the dial temporarily or something like that, then it would be a non-issue for me. But that to me was extremely frustrating. Every time I brought the camera to my eye to take a picture, I had to reset the focus point. Classic negative may be my new favorite film simulation on Fuji cameras. Images that you can get with the simulation in combination with the film grain settings in the camera have yielded me some of the most film-like results straight out of camera with zero editing done to them, which is extremely impressive. And really, if you lean into that kind of style, then it could extremely simplify your entire shooting process by just shooting this camera in JPEG and treating the images as if they were film. That to me is exciting and makes me just kind of fall in love with that classic negative film simulation. I only had a couple hours with the camera, so the photos I got weren't necessarily the best, but I hope that they give you a bit of an idea of the characteristics of the new version 2 23mm f2 lens. I think the Fuji X100V is a perfect culmination of the past 10 years of the Fuji X series, and I personally can't wait to get my hands on one.